Hi everyone, welcome to another episode. Today I'm going to go over another game that I played in a rapid tournament. I'm going to show you how I played against someone who was like 200 rating points stronger than me. How I sort of tackled that challenge. And I was white and my opponent was black, so let's see how I started. So I played the Vienna game, something a little bit different, try to surprise my opponent in the opening. And so far he's played all the right moves. He countered the F4 move of D5, which is theory, and I played a move Queen F3. This is still theory as well. You can also play Knight to F3, but this move is the latest move, so F5. So I haven't seen this move before, so already I'm out of theory. Looks like a good move. Defends the knight, keeps the knight in the center. It creates a lot of space. So I played D4. I had the option of playing D3 to exchange knight for knight first, then D4, but I decided to just take space in the center, and I'll deal with this pesky knight later. So knight C6, immediately targeting my D4 pawn, and then bishop to B5. So notice how I waited till the knight developed to C6 before playing the bishop out. If I'd played the bishop out earlier to like E2 or D3, I would have had to waste another move by now moving it to B5 to pin the knight. My opponent copies me, and I decide to develop my knight here to defend my other knight. So if my opponent decides to capture everything on C3, I can take back with the queen and I don't have to double up my pawns. My opponent has technically a slightly bad bishop. This bishop here is kind of blocked in by its own pawns, whereas if you look at my pieces, my bishop's got room to come out and my other bishop's doing something. So I feel like I'm pretty happy coming out of the opening. My bishops are out, my knights are out, and I'm ready to castle. My opponent castles and I castle. So like I said, he's got a stronger knight than me, but he's got a weaker bishop. So you'd probably call this around even. It's still a pretty complex position. Only one pair of pawns has been exchanged. And if you don't remember, this is rapid. So yeah, my opponent decides to reroute the knight, I'm guessing to play C6 and have a strong pawn center. And then with ideas potentially of coming to the king side and pushing this pawn to get the bishop out. So I can see his plan. So the only thing with this plan is it's got one weakness. And that weakness is that I can now exchange a lot of pieces off. So I'll show you the tactics. So I take the knight, and because of the way it temporarily is, notice my opponent cannot capture the knight this way because of a check. This check also threatens the bishop, and you might say, yeah, he can block it with the knight, which defends the bishop, but then I play bishop C4, again attacking the knight, and then if he tries to defend the knight, which is great, I just take, and then take, and then take there. For some reason it's playing up. So take, and then I take on B4. So I win a piece. So let's go back. So my opponent is forced to take the other way, this way, which opens up my rook. And notice how it keeps the pawns balanced. So the pawns are all in the same, like they're all opposite each other, so there's no imbalance in the pawn structure. So I decided to swap everything off and just keep the game very boring, keep it all very simple. We both have two bishops and a knight, a rook each. So I try to make it hard for my opponent to have any unbalances to work against me with, keeping it pretty drawish. And if anything, like I said, I have a slight advantage because I've got a bit better development. As you'll see, I'll play C3 and then I play my knight out. So my knight's getting ready to come in here. If my opponent were to play knight F5, I would just swap it off. Again, he's a stronger player, so I'm trying to just defend and keep a slight advantage and keep the pieces the same. So bishop E6, bishop G5. So putting pressure on the knight, the king can't move that way, and I'm threatening to bring rook to F1 check, which would win the knight. So opponent plays C6, to stop me. Check, king in the center. Now, I played bishop to e2. Again, this is where I went a little bit wrong. I was playing a stronger player and I decided just to keep it even, keep the game going. I might have a slight advantage. This bishop is a little bit blocked in by my pawns, whereas my two bishops sort of have a little bit more room to move. So I would say maybe a little slight advantage to me, but I actually had a much stronger move here. And this is when, when you're playing a stronger player, you don't forget that you can try and win. So this is where it gets a bit tactical, which is not my strong point. But the computer recommended knight to h5, giving up the bishop. Now, if you think about why would the computer go knight h5, there's a very specific tactical reason. To be honest, this move didn't even enter my mind, but it shows there's always tactics lurking, even in similar positions where things are pretty even. Always be on the watch out for tricky moves. So if my opponent plays f6, this is good for me because I can either go check in here. Notice the f-file's covered, and I can swap off, followed by a check, followed by, for example, I could do rook in here. And yeah, I lose the bishop, but then check, and then I get a pawn. So I at least win a pawn, and I've got a strong passed pawn. My opponent also has a passed pawn, but it's protected. So these tactics work out in my favor. So if my opponent plays g6, I win a pawn. What happens if my opponent takes on b5? Now I get a pawn for my bishop. Again, notice how the rook covers the f-file. So the king steps across. Okay, I'm down a piece. What have I got to show for it besides a pawn? Well, now the rook comes into f6. Notice how I've got 3 active pieces. My opponent is just a little bit behind in development. The rook's still sitting on a8 and the bishop over here isn't really doing much. So I play rook into f6. Now I'm actually threatening to win the bishop with 2 pieces. And because the knight's in the way, the rook can't defend. So the only way to defend the bishop is to move the bishop. Where are you going to move the bishop to? You can't move it to this square because the knight covers. You could move it over here, out of the way, or back here. Let's say you try to play the most defensive, move it back to the back row, defending everything. Then look at this check. Notice how the knight covers this square, and the bishop's threatening the knight, and the rook covers all these squares. The king has to move across, and then I win my bishop back. So now I win my piece back, and again, I've managed to win a pawn. Now, is this winning? It's not actually winning, I think it's advantage, but it just goes to show that it was a tricky way to win a pawn. So always be on the lookout for tactics like that. Just because your piece is attacked doesn't mean you have to move it. You can create a counter threat. Back to the game. So I played bishop to e2, he played g6, stopping any knight shenanigans. Now, if my knight was already on h5, I would also have the f6 square available. So I don't have any squares available. I decide to use the square for my rook, which attacks the bishop. My opponent brings the king up to defend, and I'm just playing quiet moves. Again, I was in the mindset of trying to draw this game. I didn't want to be passive, I wanted to be active, but not take too many risks. Knight chased away my rook, bishop came back, and now I pinned the bishop to the rook, which forces a series of exchanges. So my opponent protects the rook, which unpins the bishop, and then I decide to swap it all off again, leaving myself with a light squared bishop and a light squared bishop. So I didn't unbalance it, I didn't leave myself with a dark squared bishop versus a light squared bishop. When I was trying to draw the game, I just tried to swap off identical pieces. So rook and rook, bishop and bishop. So now we both have a knight, a bishop, and symmetrical pawns. So again, there's not many chances for me to lose this. I bring my king up to a good square, and my opponent defends the dark squares with his knight, and the light squares with his bishop and pawn. So my opponent is defending. My king's slightly higher than his, and from this point I decide to reroute my knight. He swaps. I took with a pawn, which I think in hindsight probably wasn't the best. It's probably better to take with the king in this position to keep my pawns connected, and then something like this would have happened. And look how symmetrical this is. It's literally an identical position. So there's no way if I keep things the same, that I can lose this. I took with a pawn, which created a bit of an unbalance. Like I said, I didn't want to do that. I decided to do it thinking maybe I can get some advantage here. And then we just played like this, and my opponent played knight back to d8. I'm thinking he was probably looking to bring the king back and the knight up. I was looking at moves such as g5 now, when he plays h5, and then I don't really have much to go with. He can move the king later and threaten to win a pawn. So say if I go g4, he might want to push to keep me with a weak pawn, and my king's kind of trapped in here. So king back would be a funny checkmate. So yeah, g4 might not be the best. But yeah, I decided to just offer a draw here because that looked a bit sketchy. I didn't want to commit, and I thought, well, if I play a move like c4, which is the other type of move, it's that I could try to open up the game. It sort of again it's risky. It creates again a pawn unbalance. See how I've got the more imbalances you create, the more risk you create. So the more potential reward as well. But in this case, my opponent, for example, I get my knight into a good square, check. Oh, I can take the pawn. There's a chance to win a pawn as well. So, but then you get counterplayed, and it should be at least be a draw. Take. If you see this position, maybe I'm up a pawn, but these double pawns don't do much. So I might have been able to play for a win, but again, my opponent didn't have to take that pawn when I played it. He could have just basically defended, went back with a knight. Then what if I take? Again, I can't attack the pawn. I can push the pawns on the side here, but I can't really achieve anything. Say if he keeps going back and forth, what's the next move? If I retreat with my king, the knight, he's got potential to bring the knight over. My king, even if it runs all the way over to the queen side, it can't do much over there anyway. So I hope you like this game. It's pretty boring, but sometimes you got to try and draw against a stronger opponent, and I showed you some principles on how to do that. If you'd like and subscribe, if you like these videos, or if you've got any ideas for me to show more concepts, please let me know. And yeah, please see you next time.